Hello friends, welcome to the series which we are doing on issues in world history 20th century, and today we will talk about modernity. In the earlier two lectures on modernity we talked about how modernity and tradition they are linked, and we also talked about certain theories which are concerned with modernity, and today also we will try to repeat some of the things which we discussed so that some kind of a continuity is maintained in that sense. And then thereafter we will talk about new things, and earlier also we talked about Giddens' idea of modernity and how it is linked to capitalism, industrialism, surveillance programs and activities in the military power, that how changes which came in these kinds of fields where we find that too much industrialization could be seen in the framework of the industrial revolution, and how industries developed across the world in different countries. Then we also see within the framework of the surveillance programs that how the technology also improved over a period of time within the context of the surveillance programs, and the military power, in that sense that we find that the military power of the different countries and how they were vying or competing with each other, in that sense where they wanted to have more and more kinds of new weapons etc. for themselves, and they could in a way compete with each other in that sense. And we see that when you talk about theories, Giddens' theory of structuration and its basic components, they adequately describe modernity as we discussed in the last lecture as well. And these elements are distanciation or separation of time and space, and disembedding and reflexivity. So all these kinds of things we discussed in the last lecture, and we also talked about that how in the pre-modern societies time and space were interconnected. However, with the onset of modernity, time and space were no longer closely linked, and this interconnection became very weak in that sense we see. And how distanciation it helps in the establishment of the organizations and bureaucracy and makes possible nation state which is international, that is it is possible to connect local and global arenas. Again, modern society is within the matrix of history, and it takes from that to influence present as well. And we see that how ultimately such distanciation makes possible second of the Giddens factors of modernity, that is disembedding. And we find that how disembedding itself is a process of transcending local context, and it's reorganizing itself along indefinite stretches of time and space. And according to Giddens, there are two varieties of disembedding factors, and these are symbolic tokens, which is money. This allows for the time space distanciation and allows money transactions with those who are widely separated in time and space. And the systems of professional expertise is also there. These are very useful because they also help create environment. And some such experts, they include doctors and lawyers, and other experts, they affect the everyday commodities and even property as well. So we find that how symbolic tokens, as we talked about money being one, and how it is very helpful in that sense where time space distanciation is there, and how money transactions are allowed with in that sense with those who are widely separated in time and space, as we discussed this in this particular context as well. And when one is talking about the expert systems, then we find that how they provide the reassurance across time and space. And when you talk about again in the abstract systems, trust is fundamental not only to modern societies, also because symbolic tokens and expert systems, they serve to disembed society in the modern world. So we find that how an economy which is based on monetary transactions and legal systems, they work because members have trust in them. So trust is an important factor in that sense, and how monetary transactions, because we find money, for example, many times when it is made of paper, when it is made of some kind of a metal, it does not have any intrinsic value, but the value is there because we say that the value has been given by the ruling dispensation in the framework of the government or any institution which is controlling the system. So this kind of a trust is generated because of the kind of legal validity which is there in that particular system, or the kind of guarantee which is being given by the ruling dispensation. And we also see that another basic characteristic of modernity is the phenomena of reflexivity. Reflexivity is in that sense that how one can in a way introspect about oneself, one can make some kind of a decision, some kind of an observation regarding oneself. So that is the idea of reflexivity. And we find that all the social and the psychological aspects, processes, events can be reflected upon and understood better in working as an activity that influences further development of a phenomena. The fact of disembodiment indicates that how we find that all the kind of processes which are either social or psychological in nature, and how when they are being reflected upon, when they are being observed, thought about, they could be understood better. And we also find that this the fact of disembodiment, it indicates the need for trust, which is very, very important, and need for the expert systems as well. And when you talk about scholars, that how they have tried to understand these kinds of concepts which are available, we find that Giddens in a way talks about trust, that it is socialized into children and then reinforced by behavior that conforms to this expectation of mutually reliable behaviors. So in that sense, when we try to understand it, that how over a period of time trust is being socialized into children, it is a learned behavior, people learn it, and then over a period of time we reinforce it by behavior which in a way conforms to this expectation, where mutually reliable behaviors are being exhibited. And we find that this is also accompanied by destabilizing factors, risk factors that threaten trust and create an ongoing lack of security in people. So trust may not be always in a way absolute in that sense, because destabilizing factors, they would also be there, and these risk factors, they in a way threaten the trust which is there, and that is how some kind of an insecurity is being created as well. And we find that how the risk of the nuclear wars is neither fought nor won, and risk factor in global or local war is such that the several dangers points have arisen, and the disarmament of the military of the nuclear warheads could easily be one of the international projects to increase sense of security for the subjects. So we find that when you talk about the nuclear wars and the risks which are associated with nuclear wars, which are not even fought for that matter, they are not even won for that matter, but that kind of a risk which is there in this kind of a global or the local war, where we find that there is a lot of danger. And when you talk about these kinds of prospective risks, then we talk about the disarmament of the military of the nuclear warheads, which are in a way going to threaten the world at some point of time. And when such kind of disarmament measures they are being taken, when these kinds of aspects they are being talked about and they are being discussed at the international level, and it is also one of the international projects as well, disarmament is being talked about at different levels, or in a way not using any kind of a nuclear warhead in that sense. And international bodies like UNO, etc., they are there, that any kind of escalation of any conflict between different countries is to be restricted in such a sense that no such eventuality can occur. So by any kind of a disarmament, we also in a way increase the sense of security for the subjects as well. And scholars like Giddens, they have talked about how the risk factor, it extends into the material environment and what can be done to prevent its degradation. For for example, forests, rivers, rural and the urban habitats which are there. And again, the global investments which are existing in the institutional settings are also risky, and the subjects, they take notice of the risk while taking action as well. So when you talk about the risk factors, we find that they could be seen in the material environment which is there, and apart from that, we also see in the framework of the environment as well, that how environmental degradation has to be stopped. And when you talk about environmental degradation, you talk about the flora and the fauna, and in that sense, any kind of rural and the urban habitats, or the rivers or forest and other kinds of natural settings, they have to be looked into. And we find that when you talk about the global investments which are there in the various institutions, they are also seen to be risky, in that sense that many times we find that they make some kind of an exit depending upon the risk which is there in that particular economy or region. And we also see that the risk factors, they are also taken into account when people are making any kinds of investments as well. That is also seen in that context. And we see that how over a period of time, the kind of changes which have come, it is also there. And we find that how the religion, they receded as an important factor in many of the societies, and only those facts are believed in which subjects can realize and turn into reality. That is one aspect which is there. And we also see that when you talk about the modern world, then we find that the awareness of the different risk factors, it is also in a way increasing, and it is also one of the facts of the modernity as well. And again, when you talk about the subjects and the public, they are also aware that even experts, they cannot handle certain risk and risk situation. So we find that many of the risks, they cannot be even handled by the experts as well. And one of the most important risks in this context is many a time environmental risks, in that sense that how the kind of harm which one is doing to the environment in the race for more and more urbanization, because of which we find the balance is also going away, and it creates some kind of a disequilibrium. And so the ideas of sustainable development, they are being talked about nowadays, so that we are able to minimize the risks which are associated with development. So this kind of an awareness with regard to these risk factors, it is also part of modernity as well. And modernity is also focusing on these kinds of areas, apart from the areas which are there in the framework of the environmental factors. We also find that how the material world is also in a way looking into these aspects. And when you talk about scholars like Giddens, who talks about the ontological insecurity and modernity, and he says that the ontological insecurity has been created within modernity itself, and suggests that design faults in the construction of the modern world is one. Apart from that, the operator failure of those who run modern world is another, and unintended consequences have been talked about, and the reflexivity of the modern society has also been taken into consideration by him. And he also says that in the modern society, control becomes an important issue because the new knowledge is continuously cropping up and superseding the old one and giving it a different direction altogether. So we find that how controlling is seen as an important issue, and how new knowledge over a period of time, the kind of changes which are happening in the society is bringing about a lot of new knowledge, new information, and people, they are fed with, in a way, information overload, that the kind of information which is cropping up time and again. So it is creating a lot of information overload, and many times we find that the coming of the new information is also in a way giving the old information a completely different direction in that sense. and old ideas about a particular thing, they also get changed with the arrival of the new knowledge. And as an answer to this kind of a situation, Giddens suggests the utopian realism in that sense. And when you talk about this kind of an idea, and the utopian ideals and the social reality, they should be taken together as a single unit rather than aim for just one or other. So Giddens talks in this particular framework, and when you are talking about the utopian ideals and the social reality, then how they have to be understood in that sense, and how they have to be seen as a single unit. And we also find that he is also critical of the postmodern theories as well, and feels that they were systematic knowledge, impossible intellectual activity or academics would come to some kind of a standstill. So he in a way also criticizes the postmodern theories, and he feels that the systematic knowledge in that sense is impossible, and the intellectual activity would in a way come to a standstill. So that is what he also talks about, and we also find that there are also the post-scarcity systems as well, and the multi-layer democracy, demilitarization, humanization of technology. These are the kinds of aspects which are important in this particular framework. And we also realize that it is also clear that the postmodernity cannot be predicted in such simple parameters which need not appear at all. So we also find that you in a way one has to see the postmodernity in that sense, and one cannot in a way predict the postmodernity in such simple parameters. And so in that context, the various scholars, especially Giddens, we find that he also talks about the reflexive modern world and how it pushes self into becoming a reflexive project as well. Thus the self becomes an area to be reflected upon with a view to ameliorating it, improving it in that sense, and bringing it into tune with itself and society. So this kind of an observation about oneself, and how one is trying to in a way reflect on the modern world, and how this kind of world is becoming some sort of reflexive project as well. And when one is talking about self, then we find that how one needs to improve it over a period of time, and how it comes into tune with itself as well, and with the society as well. And we find that scholars like Giddens, he has also talked about that how subject is a result of the inner search, and also body must be controlled and socially projected in a specific manner in a relevant physical space. And there are formulas how which define that we interact. In fact, reflexivity has led to a body obsession and social neurosis as well. So we find that how when you talk about the inner search, and how one is talking about that how body needs to be controlled, and how it is to be projected in a particular or a specific manner. And we also see that when one is talking about reflexivity, and how this has in a way led to a body obsession and a social neurosis as well, because one is constantly in a way observing oneself in that sense, and one is trying to in a way bring about some kind of a change in oneself. And when one is talking about the modern society, then we find that how it is connected to modernity, and both of them, they are also characterized by setting apart some areas of deviance from the normal day-to-day living as well. And this has been in a way termed as sequestration of experience by Giddens. And we find that phenomena like madness, sickness, death and sexuality are sequestered and alienated as areas that should be hidden from attention. So we find that when he talks about these kinds of areas, and these kinds of areas, they should not be given any kind of attention, they should be sequestered as well. And the reason that the phenomena of sequestration comes about is because abstract systems have controlled large segments of society, as has been argued by him. And we find that though sequestration brings with it a sense of pinnacling security, it is quite clear that there is an avoidance of basic truths such as processes of death, sickness, madness, etc. And we find that the modernity has both positive and negative consequences as well. And when you talk about modernity, that how modernity has brought those kind of changes, and because of those changes we find that it has both the positives as well as the negative consequences. And when one is talking about the negative consequences, is that there tends to be a sort of malaise, or what Giddens terms personal meaninglessness. And this is because important area of daily life have been sequestered and repressed. So when one is talking about this kind of a negative consequence, then personal meaninglessness is one of the important component of it. And when where one feels that one is not important, one is meaningless in that sense, and so the life also itself does not hold any kind of meaning as well. And we find that when one is talking about these kinds of aspects, then one finds that the light at the tunnel end of tunnel is the reflexivity of the modern life, which as it increases will ensure that such sequestration does not take place, and processes that have been swept under carpet will one day be most significant and important. So we find that scholars like Giddens is concerned with modernity. We find that Beck is interested in a new kind of a modernity. So Beck and Giddens feel that we are living in a modern world rather than a post-modern one. So when you talk about the risk that accompanies the new modernity, Beck labels the new modernity as reflexive modernity. And Beck feels that relationships in such a society are increasingly reflexive in nature, and individuals are forced to make a wide range of individual decisions so far as relationships are concerned, and how they can be begun and maintained as well. So in a way, how we see the relationships and the kind of changes which are happening in the relationships, and people, they are becoming reflexive as well, they are in a way observing their relationships, and how to in a way begin in a start or maintain the relationships, that is also one of the concerns. And Beck says that within modernity itself there is a change from industrial society to risk society, which is different from the industrial society, but not totally. Thus the classical modernity was centered on producing wealth and equal distribution of the same. On the other hand, advanced modern societies' main issue is the reduction and the canalization of the risk. So we find that the main concern in the classical modernity believed in the equality, concern of the advanced modernity is the safety. These risks, they come from wealth produced in the industry. So this includes the, in a way, the nuclear industry and bombs, whose effect and side effect can be devastating as well. And when you compare it within the framework of the nations across the world, whether the rich nations or the poor nations, we find that the rich nations are able to minimize the risk. Poor nations, they find that the risk is centered in and around them. And richer nations, they make further wealth and profit by catering to the poor nations in order to build the technology that will help them to control risk in the poor nations and trying to ameliorate them to some extent. And it is pointed out that however no nation is completely safe from risks, none are individuals as well. And we find that the nations that profit from the risk factor in the poor nations find that there is a boomerang effect, and the factors associated with the risk tend to become proactive and try to eliminate or control areas where risk reduction technologies are being made in wealthy nations. So we find that however, though the advanced modernity creates risks, we find that accompanying these risks, risk is reflexivity, and makes those that produce risk themselves begin to think about the situation and how to alter it. But this is also in the case of those nations that are poor and face these risks as well. So we will talk further about modernity and the kind of theories and ideas which are associated with the modernity in our next lecture. Thank you very much.